Jonathan Edwards is a man who has fascinated many scholars alike for the past few centuries. He was a man with a brilliant mind whose life work reveals an individual who eagerly searched the scriptures for wisdom and truth. The depth of his persuasions and the insight gained from reading his writings has caused many to research the very essence of who Jonathan Edwards was. Because Edwards was a philosopher, a theologian, a pastor, a scientist, a missionary, and evangelist, many different fields of study find interest in his complex character. Christopher Grasso states that Edwards remains a profoundly engaging puzzle, open to interdisciplinary interaction, drawing, as few thinkers in American history do, philosophers, literary critics, and theologians into the same conversation. Additionally, since Edwards' passing in 1758, many are still researching the impact Edwards has had on American religious culture. Some historians seek to understand Edwards' personal religious background in an effort to gain better insight into his theology and his sermons. Early America was a mixture of various religions, each of which sought the freedom the New World offered to practice their beliefs. Jonathan Edwards was born into such a world. For Jonathan Edwards, Kenneth P. McKenna argues that it was Calvinism that had a lasting impact on Edwards. The reason being that he, Edwards, is an exponent of the Reformed Puritan theological pietistic framework that prevailed in New England since settlement and owed much to Calvin. The time in which Edwards lived was truly unique and has called many to research it. It can be determined that Edward was born, as the Book of Esther states, in such a time as this. Edwards was at the forefront of the Great Awakening that had happened in the New England colonies. Lawrence E. Brinstad notes that before the Great Awakening had happened, theologically, Christianity had degenerated from an inner experience of the grace of God to a mere external observance of the sacraments and a superficial morality. Yes, New England had the religious zeal when associates with the Puritans, but it is important to note that before the Great Awakening had occurred, religion had become a hollow experience since it was no longer focusing on the mighty power of a living God. Many are also interested in learning more about his family. His past relatives had some colorful life stories that were of the notorious sort. Murder and adultery were some of the things that were part of his family tree. Some say, as George M. Marsden does, that Jonathan Edwards is sometimes criticized for having too dim a view on human nature. In reading about the infamous relatives that Edwards had in his life, it can be concluded that Edwards was keenly aware of man's sinful disposition and the frailty of the human existence because he had seen it firsthand. The fascination with Jonathan Edwards still persists into the modern era. Edwards was born at an important time in American history, and he helped define the era leading up to the American Revolution. He was a man born in a unique time, to an interesting family, and he was able to find God's sovereignty through it all.